panel. And I really, well, not panel, I think it's very important, the report of the UN high-level panel. And I invite John, I have to look, Corbalia. I'm very sorry. I'd like to invite you up the stage and lead us through the panel and the report. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's great to be today here at the EuroDIG, and I would like to thank EuroDIG Secretariat, our friends and colleagues from Netherlands for hosting this year EuroDIG, and would like to thank all of you for finding the time to join today's session, and also for contributing substantively to discussion that we had over the last 9 months on the high-level panel on digital cooperation. I would like also to convey the message from the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, and his team, the message that the panel itself and the follow-up, which we'll discuss later on today, is guided by inclusiveness, multi-stakeholder approach, open and frank dialogue on the issues that we have been facing in digital community worldwide. The plan for today is to first provide basic information about the panel. I know that most of you have participated in some of our sessions, therefore I apologize for repeating the facts that you already know. And then we will go through the panel, major recommendation of the panel, and start unpacking them with the main idea to set the stage for discussion in EuroDIG community about the ways and means how EuroDIG community can help in the follow-up consultations and implementation of the major recommendation from the panel's work. We are particularly honored that Commissioner Gabriel mentioned the panel on quite a few occasions in her keynote address this morning, and it is reassuring that European Union and all stakeholders in Europe are taking an important notice and substantive interest in the panel's recommendation and overall work. As you can see from this photo, although you cannot depict personality and backgrounds of people who were participating in the panel, you know some of them, like Vint is over there, Windsurf, Fadi Sheikh Hadi. One of the characteristics of the panel is that, according to the UN colleagues, it was the most diverse panel in the history of the United Nations. And I can tell you, as a person who has been co-leading the Secretariat, it was enormously demanding task, but also rewarding task. And when somebody tells you that diversity is by itself will bring the substantive discussion, be cautious about it. Diversity is a great asset, is a great basis for discussion, but it requires a lot of efforts to reduce lost in translation, and not necessarily lost in translation among different languages or cultures, national cultures, but I would say more to create a smooth conversation between different professional cultures. And it was one of the major challenges in our work, and it was also an enriching element. Now, for those of you from Internet governance community, and I can see quite a few colleagues who participated in various working groups, commissions, working group on Internet governance, you will probably find some common points of which we have been discussing in the past. But what has been an important aspect of the panel work within the panel itself, but in particular with the communities outside, was the need to socialize some core concepts, understanding about meaning of some keywords that are quite common in the, let's say, EuroDIG or Internet governance communities. Therefore, today we will unpack the recommendation of the panel, especially those recommendations of direct relevance for Internet governance. We try to, usually the problem starts with definitions, and one good thing is that we didn't try to find exact definition of digital cooperation. Otherwise, as you know from diplomatic processes, it could have taken not 9 months, but 9 years, I guess. But we understood digital cooperation as a way of working together to address the societal, ethical, legal and economic impacts of digital technology in order to maximize benefits to society and minimize harm. You can see the interplay between opportunities and risks, more or less dynamics that you can find in any speech delivered today on digital issues. Here is the photo from the beginning of the panel's work back in September. My friends told me that I put on weight. This is the way how I deal with the stress, but now I will have a time for the relaxing summer after the closing of the work of the panel. Now, what is important to stress here are the few points. The Secretary General established the panel, guided by frequent calls which have the call in the name, like a Paris call, like Christchurch call, but also calls from media, from governments, from other communities, to provide space for discussion on the current digital developments and in particular future digital developments. In our discussion and consultation process, you have a few photos from the consultation process, we realized relatively early in the panel's work that we cannot boil the ocean. There are so many issues, more than 40 or 50 digital policy issues. Each issue area, whether it is cybersecurity or blockchain or artificial intelligence, and you can list all other fake news, human rights, e-commerce, has its own dynamics with many meetings with the policy communities, experts, writings, declarations. Therefore, we realized that we cannot cover in depth all of those issues. Therefore, what we decided to focus on is to answer the question how digital cooperation should be conducted, and reflecting on the question what, to the extent to explain how. This is some sort of formula that guided our discussion. The Secretary General established the panel, and the main mandate formally of the panel was to advise him on the question of digital cooperation. We submitted a report last Monday in New York on the 10th of June, and this report is now in the hands of Secretary General, but also, what Secretary General clearly indicated, it is a report for the wider community. And since we will be discussing later on, during this session and tomorrow, what are the practical steps to implement this report, you can start already thinking about the ways and means how your organizations, your governments, and you individually can take part in the implementation of the recommendation of this report. The panel itself was not supposed to conduct comprehensive consultations. It is an expert panel, and typically speaking, expert panels are inwards looking. They gather, they basically consult internally, and then they produce a report. This panel was different. I'm sure that you participated in some of our online or in situ consultations, and we basically consulted communities from Silicon Valley to Shenzhen. We consulted governments. We had quite intensive consultation in Africa and developing countries. We approached some communities which are not typically involved in digital policy space, like science fiction writers. We asked them to provide some views, online gamers, people who are dealing with the elderly. Therefore, we try to extend typical IG community or technical community by engaging other actors. One of the legacies of the panel's work is that it is expected that the post-panel consultations will have the same level of interaction and involvement. And in addition to report, which we'll comment in a few minutes, one of the major achievements was to introduce this inclusive and multi-stakeholder approach as a modus operandi and to familiarize colleagues from member states and United Nations about some new approaches when it comes to consultations and involvement in digital policy. You know, I'm coming from this community, Internet governance community, and I have to admit that I was pleasantly surprised by the openness of both member states and the UN system in trying to approach discussion and negotiate, well, it wasn't necessarily negotiation, policy making in different ways. Therefore, there are some very encouraging signs in this respect. You have here some statistics about the number of stakeholders whom we consulted in the process, both from the member states, the regions, and the stakeholder communities. Now, I will quickly go through the main elements from the report and provide, since you have had the chance to consult the report, and I won't be reading the report again for you, I will try to provide some annotated comments that can give you context in which those issues have been discussed and what is basically travaux préparatoires, what is the spirit in which the report was drafted. We have a few paragraphs which we label as the Declaration of Digital Interdependence. The main message of this declaration was to, in a way, semi-officially, within our mandate, put the end to the previous declaration which argued for digital independence, which was issued in 1996 by John Barlow. Later on, he regretted his strong views that digital space should be completely independent from the rest of the society. But our message was to indicate and to strengthen this aspect of digital space, that it makes us more interdependent on all levels, from individuals to companies, society itself, governments, and that element of digital interdependence have been underlying message throughout the report. Interdependence is a good basis for developing substantive engagement, but interdependence, as we know from history of the mankind, humanity, can lead both towards conflicts and cooperation. Therefore, that was one of the major messages. Yes, we have digital interdependent society, but it doesn't mean that it will work for the advantage of humanity without creating certain approaches, certain structure, which will harvest and harness the power of digital interdependence. The second underlying theme was leaving no one behind, and here you will see the linkages with SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and Agenda 2030. And we'll reflect in more details later on. You have here the 4 points: inclusive digital economy, how we work and learn in the digital field, how to build capacity, economic policy and regulation. The third major chapter was on the individual, society and digital technology, with, I would say, 3 major blocks. One is human rights and human agency, and the second one is trust, security and stability. And the last one, which I guess is of the most direct interest for you here, is on the global digital cooperation. And let me just unpack the terminology or clarify terminology. Cooperation was used as umbrella concept. And for those of you who are in the governance process, you can see that within this concept there are quite a few references to the governance per se. And we will discuss later on how we went through the discussion and negotiation on this governance aspect. Leaving no one behind is the first part, and here we sort of corrected unofficially one missing part in Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals have very few references to digital technology. In the SDG 9C and few additional, something on online learning. Therefore, the panel's recommendations advised that by 2030, which is also a framework for Sustainable Development Goals, all adults should have full access to digital networks, to digital health and digital finance. Therefore, it is informally speaking, and then don't quote me officially, but it's informally, one can say, 18th digital goal. And there is a need to have digital issues stronger presented in this field. Second point, which raised a lot of, I would say sometimes heated debates and different views, was on digital public goods and data commons. And I can already see an interesting discussion here on this issue. Then digital equality for women and marginalized group, generally question of inclusion. One aspect which raised a lot of positive interest was the question of measuring data in digital world. And we came to the more or less common understanding that we have very little solid data on digital developments worldwide. And that very often we discuss digital policy and internet governance without sufficient data or impact of data, in particular on society. Therefore, there is a recommendation to move forward on the metrics, especially around the question of inclusion. And the last point is to establish digital policy help desks on the regional and global levels. And this proposal addressed the concern of many stakeholders, especially from small and developing countries, that they basically cannot find easily entry point in digital policy discussions. And here the idea, and that we can elaborate more, I'm just going quickly, more or less 10,000 feet, we can focus on specific issues through your question, was to create a digital policy help desks. On the second set of issues on human rights and human agency, there is a call for Secretary General to conduct a review how human rights apply to digital technology. Good news is that governments are already taking some similar initiative in the UN Human Rights Council. There is initiative by South Korea, Denmark, Austria, and I think Brazil, to review human rights, the impact of digital technology on human rights horizontally throughout all specific human rights covered by Human Rights Council, moving in a way beyond privacy protection and freedom of expression, which have been two main human rights covered by the Human Rights Council, but moving in the question of disabilities, a question of gender equality and other human rights. The second point in these recommendations is that is related to artificial intelligence and request for the accountability of humans for autonomous intelligence systems. You will see the recommendation itself is more elaborate. It includes question of transparency, and it also includes the principle that decision about life and death should not be taken by autonomous intelligence systems or artificial intelligence. And then there is a recommendation which basically invites more comprehensive, inclusive discussion about impact of social media companies on societies worldwide. Those are three sets: review, artificial intelligence, and impact of social media, in particular social media companies on societies worldwide. The third set of issues is on trust, security, and stability. As you may imagine, it was quite a delicate area to discuss because of the current processes that are ongoing in the UN system. You know that there is United Nations Government Group of Experts, an open-ended group, two processes which follow up on previous UNGG, what is the acronym. Therefore, we suggested multi-stakeholder global commitment on digital trust and security online. As you will see in the recommendation, it is quite general, and it basically should, if there is a need, supplement work of the UNGG and open-ended group, if there is a need, if that need is recognized in particular by member states, but ultimately if there is any discussion on global commitment, it should be multi-stakeholder in its form and outcome. The last point, and we are coming closer to home, if I can say, to issues which are of most direct concern for us here, for the Internet governance community, is on mechanism from global digital cooperation. And thanks to the inputs, and I can see quite a few colleagues here in the room, we basically approach this discussion in a rather innovative way by avoiding discussion on the end product, what should be architecture, but we started first from values and principles that digital cooperation should support. And here we had a relatively easy task because you have set from the Net Mundial, from UN Charter, from UN Declaration on Human Rights, and we combine some sort of traditional UN values and principles with values and principles developed by Internet community for the last 3 or 4 decades. That set the stage for discussion, and we hope that that discussion will continue in the context of the global commitment for digital cooperation, which will be one of the follow-up activities to the panel conclusions. Discussion on global commitment for digital cooperation will be conducted in the preparation for the celebration of 75 years of the United Nations. Next year, UN will celebrate 75th birthday. And one of the ideas is that there will be once more discussion on the revisiting and having commitment of all stakeholders around the core values and principles on digital cooperation. Now, after we established that, we then analyzed the gaps in the current digital cooperation or digital governance framework. We identify a few gaps. One is this lack of metrics. Then we identify a gap of lack of participation from small and developing countries, lack of leadership, and you can see in the report what were those gaps that exist currently. And then we propose the functions that should address those gaps, leadership function, cooperation function, capacity building, evidence-based, and the other functions. And in the last step, we suggested 3 forms that should perform those functions. And we are fortunate that this year we'll have IGF in Berlin, and there is 100 years of Bauhaus movement in the arts, which has one of the basically underlying messages that form should follow the function. Our aim was also that in this build-up from values, gaps, function, forms, we can provide the building blocks for the discussion that Secretary General will initiate with the communities worldwide without unnecessary closure, because we were a group of 22 experts. We consulted communities worldwide, but this issue is on such importance for member states, business, technical community that it requires broader consultation. In that build-up, we came to the 3 forms for digital cooperation. One is Internet Governance Forum Plus. The second is Distributed Co-Governance Architecture. And third one is Digital Commons Architecture. And based on your question and interest, we can go into more details. But IGF Plus essentially builds on current mandate of the IGF and address some of those gaps. There was also a requirement to have a multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary or systemic approach to regulation and digital policy worldwide. That would be more or less all in this, let's say, 10,000 feet survey, what we did, how we approach the digital cooperation. And now I would be guided by your questions. We can focus on any question related to the report, panel's work. I think that we will have some update, I don't know if Thomas is here, about the possible follow-up in EuroDIG community. The Secretary General is now discussing with the ways and means how global consultations will be conducted ahead of us. But there will be a consultation over the next 6 to 10 months. Internet Governance Forum Berlin will be an important event, especially on discussion on the IGF Plus and other elements. And then we'll have a build-up for the UN General Assembly, which will celebrate 75 years, and there will be discussion most likely on the global commitment in that context. How are we going to proceed? Thomas, would you like to say a few words on EuroDIG dynamics, and then we can open the space for discussion? I'm in your hands.
Yes. Thank you, Jovan. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Thomas Snyder from the Swiss government on stage, who will explain some more about tomorrow, because then we have a follow-up session where you can ask questions. So, okay. Thomas?
Yes, thank you, and hello, everybody. Actually, time is basically already up, but we will have time now for one question. But as you have seen in the latest version of the program, tomorrow morning, starting at 9, there will be a session on the report. It's called Part 2, where we will very briefly explain the EuroDIG process, the platform to make comments. But I think we should also use it, or in particular use it to discuss, use the fact that we all are here to discuss the report and have a substantive debate on the report already. So it will not just be an explanation about how the consultation process that EuroDIG offers works, but actually it should be a substantive debate. So that's the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jovan. So we have time for one, maximum 2 questions.
Oh, and the most difficult will be asked first. Khalid, please.
No, I'll go easy. Khalid Fatal, MLI Group. First of all, Jovan, excellent briefing, and I think this was very relevant, and it's important for us to have these questions. But it's not a question to you. It's actually a challenge that I see, and I'm going to put it to you to see how we address this, because I personally believe this requires a far greater conversation, far greater debate on the following. Many of us who have been in this space since late 90s and WSIS from 2001 onwards, who witnessed the birth of IGF, recall that it was designed to be a non-decision-making process, conversation. But the Secretary General of the United Nations, in his conclusion, in his announcement of the report on the digital cooperation, stated a few key words which I think we need to address very, very diligently and create a conversation. He stated that smart regulation are now in order. And I'm paraphrasing the words. For anybody who wants to address this, I posted an article on Circle ID on this matter. And I think we need to ask ourselves, are we going to be looking at adapting IGF from being a non-decision-making body to a decision-making body? How do you do that? And if it doesn't, because clearly this is what the conclusion of the report and the Secretary General is saying, how do we convert it forward? And what are the conversations? I'm putting this to you so at least you can help advance this conversation, because I don't believe it's really being addressed as solidly enough with all of the hoopla around the report. These a handful of words are key. How do we bring a model that is not meant to take decisions to actually become able to take decisions so that cyberspace could serve humanity and be safe for everybody?
Thank you.
My 2 cents, please.
Thank you, Khalid. Well, this is a relatively simple question. There is a need for agile, adaptive, and smart policy making. It was identified in all consultation from Silicon Valley to governments worldwide. Therefore, there is a need for that function. Now, how that function will be accommodated? Is it IGF plus or is it some other form is the other question. I can reassure you that Secretary General is fully aware, he's engineer by training, about sensitivities and specificities of digital policy space. Therefore, there is no appetite for a regulation for the sake of regulation, especially the UN. UN has more conveying power. But that need was clearly identified, to have a space where in an agile and adaptive way some norms can be adopted. That was the first message. Second message is that we have already quite a few spaces where either multilateral or multi-stakeholder where norms are adopted. Is it enough? Do we need holistic approach? Do we need multidisciplinary approach? Reports provide food for thought and provide some concrete suggestions, but that would be part of the discussion that we'll be having ahead of us. One important aspect of the report, and I'm sure that Wolfgang, if he's here, it has been his message for a long time, we send a clear message that we should avoid false dichotomy of multi-stakeholder versus multilateral approach. Those two approaches cover different fields, they can be complementary, and what we are currently seeing that many digital issues are gradually mainstreamed in the work of World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, WTO. And the real challenge is how to make these processes also more inclusive. Therefore, I think we are moving in the spirit of the age of digital interdependence from these previous false dichotomies that existed in our discussion to more clearer, open and balanced discussion about this interplay of the different policy spaces. But this is the question that your contribution and the contribution of all of you here in the room will be extremely beneficial for finding this the right approach, whether it is IGF plus or one of those models or some maybe fourth model that could be suggested. That's important to keep in mind.
Thank you, Johan. Before giving the floor to the next question, just one complimentary remark. We have heard that cooperation should be based on values, on principles, and it should perform functions. The functions are referred to in chapter 4 of the report, but elements of functions or examples of functions, they were put in the annex for the sake of readability and the length. So please look at the annex and see what functions, according to the panel, cooperation should fulfill. And then how these functions are operationalized is another question, which is to be debated. Yes, Adam?
Good afternoon. Adam Peake. Johan, thank you very much. It was a very clear and helpful introduction and review. A question, the recommendations, did the panel look at a costing of the recommendations that were made, what the economics involved of the various tranche of things that you've looked at, and any thoughts on funding and how we go forward from here? Thank you.
Short answer is no. We don't have it in the recommendation, but we discuss it in the panel's deliberations. And based on consultation that we have been having with industry, governments, and other actors, the message was more or less clear that there is a need to improve digital cooperation. And if we come with a solution that will address those needs or those functions, there will be readiness to support it. Obviously, it is on the level of general willingness, as you know, from the fundraising activities to realize or to implement general words to the checks, if we can call it. It takes some time. But I'm quite optimistic that there is a readiness to support some of those functions, especially help desk function. We heard from the development actors, and I think it would be probably the lowest hanging fruit that can be addressed in the follow-up. But we didn't, when I said no, we didn't cover funding mechanisms specifically in the recommendation of the report.
And what is not in the report, Adam, is, but you will receive a letter, Göran will receive a letter shortly, is that ICANN is invited to pay 1 cent per domain name registered to a special fund that will be set up.
There are some other requirements from ICANN, but we won't reveal it immediately.
Okay, so I think we have to move on. Thank you all. And read the report, read also the annex with the functions. Be there at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, where we will continue discussion and ask your questions, make your comments starting tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to Jovan.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas, as well. Well, for the last session, thank you, Jovan, as well, again. And we all see you tomorrow morning well prepared with